to you.
Well, first, good afternoon. Shalom. Assalamu alaikum. And just simply, how you all doing? Thank you. Thank you for that question, Robin. And thank you, Boggs family, Lee Boggs family. And as you know, the way they use the term family, it actually extends beyond their immediate family. They understood that we communicate across generations. So, I'm going to answer your question, Robin, in several parts. And I hope for everybody it's coherent. The first part is simply the term we've been using as we have talked about James Boggs. We've been using the term ancestor. And ancestor is a very important term because, you see, you can't be an ancestor without descendants. And this is a very important thing to think about because, you see, it's not only the idea of the sacredness of the ancestor, but there are ancestors who are such that they're so remote that for us they're anonymous. And for many ancestors, their descendants are so remote that they too are anonymous. And so we start with the first insight, because right now the planet is being dominated by individuals who have no respect for ancestors or descendants, which means as we try to talk about the future, it's irrelevant to them because from their point of view, you know what their death means? The end of the world. In other words, they lack the kind of commitment that we can see in a James Boggs. So we start with this point about ancestors because, you see, and it's connected to what you asked about philosophy, because, you see, ancestors, it's really striking when we read Boggs. Now, I could just say straight up, he is one absolutely amazing philosopher. And when I say philosopher, I don't mean that as a compliment. And the reason I don't mean it as a compliment is because what makes him a great philosopher is he understands that there are things even more important than philosophy. You see the paradox? This is the contradiction you're talking about. And so once we begin to understand this, we understand that for Boggs, there are several things that would make him a philosopher. Now, when I say philosopher at this moment, I don't mean a bunch of people with PhDs in philosophy or people who teach at universities. For me, those are just knowledge professionals. Okay? A philosopher, as I'm going to use it here, is a person who has a commitment to reality and the obligations that encumbers. Okay? And when I say that, you immediately know that's James and Grace Lee Boggs. Immediately. Because we start with the first thing. Once we understand this, we understand, I'm going to just spell it out in just four remarks. The first one has already been manifested in today's meeting. And that first part is the concept of love. Now, when we say love, if we think about what has been happening, love has had a beating. Stevie Wonder's right, you know. Because what beats up love is connected to those people who lack the understanding of ancestors and descendants. Because love for them can only be narcissistic love. You know the person who says, I love you because you're like me. Right? Those are the people who are so supposedly in love with themselves, there's no room for others. But there's another kind of love, and this is the love you see in Boggs's writings. American Revolution is brilliant, but also those speeches, you notice he has a pattern of always bringing up his grandmother, his great-grandmother, his mother, that links him to people like Sojourner Truth, Tubman, Douglas, many before him, Because you see, their understanding of love is that if you really love, if you truly love, it is not about you. It's about others and those whom you may not even ever meet. And that's a very extraordinary commitment to have in that understanding of love, because it has humility. The wonderful things I've heard this morning brings to light the importance of humility, of understanding things greater than yourself. And that means you can participate in that transcending element. And that beauty, that understanding of love is connected to truth. You know, one of the funny things about truth people don't understand is that truth, the origins of the word truth is in the word faith. And it's about what you can put your faith in. And this thing about truth comes to something that W.B. Du Bois noticed, and it's connected to what we've been talking about the idea of obsolescence. Du Bois noticed, Fanon noticed, Antonin Fairman in Haiti noticed, and Julia Cooper noticed this, and Boggs noticed this. No, there's no such thing as people who are intrinsically problems. There's such a thing as the conditions that make people into problems. So when Du Bois says, what does it mean to be a problem? He doesn't mean that you are the problem. Your dialectical insight comes in when you realize that there's a society that makes people into problems. You see? And so his insight is to analyze that society, but also don't fetishize it. Understand it, that it's something created by people, and that which is created by people can be changed by people. So I come to the next two parts. And the next part is I love the fact that jazz was brought up. Jazz. Because, you know, a lot of us forget this, but jazz is quintessentially a music of freedom. But it's also something I see in Boggs, that I see Boggs' thought and life as allegory. And what I mean by this, an example I sometimes give is I'm also a jazz musician. And sometimes I go to places and I see a piano or a drums, but piano, I'll go to play and somebody would say it's out of tune. And I'd say, it doesn't matter. So I play it, and a lot of times I've done this, they'll come afterwards and say, I thought it was out of tune. And my response is, it is. Who says you can't make music from an instrument that's out of tune? And that is the allegory I see in his thought and life. You see, there's a society that tells you that if you're not tuned to it, you are obsolete. You can't function. But what he is saying in his argument is perhaps it's an attachment to that kind of harmony that will make you not play beautiful music. If you let go of the idea that you're only valuable as an instrument of labor to that society, then perhaps you could get to the real question, especially in the face of abundance, which is, why the hell aren't we sharing it? Why in the world aren't we thinking about how to make the conditions for dignity, freedom, and humanity flourish? And so the last point, connected to him being a philosopher. What's beautiful, there's so much. I could write a book on just one paragraph from his writings. But there's an insight that we should pay attention to, that he returns to, which is he had a real insight in the distinction between morality and politics. And what I mean is moral responsibility is where you can blame, is it me, is it you, etc. But political responsibility is very different. Political responsibility is always about us. It's never about me. It's always about us. And the political insight, oh, am I too loud? Oh.
We want to make sure we get every word.
Oh, I just got a compliment. But the political insight is that the issue, and this is very important in a period of pessimism and a failure to think through, because some people think optimism, but they don't realize it's the other side of pessimism. The paradox is that when political reality calls you, the issue isn't what am I going to get out of it, whether I will succeed, etc. The issue is commitment. And commitment is something that transcends what is thrown at you, because if you know it's not for you, you get what you got out of that beautiful couple and their family, which is a commitment not only to Detroit, but in his writings, he understood very well that the commitment actually transcends even America. The commitment is through the course of humanity to descendants we'll never meet. The question is, are we politically taking on that responsibility? And what we hope for, is that though we'll never meet them, and I think this is what he understood, that we want to make sure our actions set the conditions for them to look back and say, thank God you acted.